Hello, everybody, it's your boy, Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, here today, because we need to talk about my favorite game of all time, or my top two games, and I want to talk about why. Nier Automata and Xenoblade Chronicles 2. So originally, when I started this top 10 series, I figured the more I thought about some things, that some places may change, but the top spot was always locked in, was always going to be a Nier Automata. And for me, it was an easy layup. There's never been another game that has told a story through the video game medium as effectively as Nier Automata, while utilizing the unique features and aspects of a video game. At least to me, right? And while I may prefer other games' overall plots, the storytelling in Nier Automata was unmatched to me. On top of that, the gameplay loop was fast, action-packed, with interesting upgrades and customization that was right up my alley. Side quests fleshed out the world and expanded on the game's overall analysis of the human condition and explored various aspects of what it means to be human and what it means to be alive. On top of that, the post-apocalyptic aesthetic, the visuals, the giant freaking robots, the android resistance, it was all as if a group of developers came to me personally and asked me what my ideal game would be, and then they made this. The world was interesting and fun to explore, the soundtrack is arguably my favorite of all time, and the characters were excellent with amazing development that grounded the story against the backdrop of how wild and wacky the world and quests can be. You can pivot from a quest line, finding machines that have lost any will to live, to another side quest where you're guarding a line of machines as they do a parade, saying repeatedly, "All you need is love, all you need is love." And funnily enough, Nier Automata didn't immediately elevate to my favorite game of all time when I first played it. It was high up there. Like most good pieces of media and art though, for me I had to digest it, hear alternate perspectives, play the game again, and I just realized, hey, for a ranking I never really considered all that deeply, Nier Automata edged out every other game for me. It had become, to my own surprise, my favorite game of all time. There had never been, and since have never been, a game that I enjoyed as much as Nier Automata. A game that has gripped me as much as Nier Automata throughout all these years. The themes and messages, the story, the character, the world, it's all just resonated with me. But there's a funny story about this, one I haven't really ever told before, or gone into detail. January of 2018, the month where I first played both Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Nier Automata, which would go on to become my number 1 and number 2 favorite games of all time. Okay, if I want to be like picky, maybe also the end of December 2017. And it's funny because at that time, I went into the new year thinking that my game of the year for 2017 was Breath of the Wild because I enjoyed that game so much. Only did I realize that, hey, there'd be 2 games that become my number 1 and 2 games of all time. I played Xenoblade Chronicles 2 right before I first played Nier Automata. I didn't play either at launch, I played them both mostly in January of 2018, and funnily enough, when I first played, I elected to beat Xenoblade 2 first, and that game more immediately resonated with me. Back then, I wasn't really one for dark stories. I wouldn't say no to them, but the more upbeat aesthetic and feel of Xenoblade 2, and the whole idea of chasing your dreams just resonated with me more at the time. And I beat Xenoblade 2 and immediately fell in love with the game, and the ending got me. It entirely gripped me and immersed me in the story and the gameplay, and I loved all of it. The ending is still probably my favorite video game ending of all time. Well, it's at least up there with Nier Automata. God, even just thinking of Nier Automata's ending has put me right back to when I first played it. You know, I'm a firm believer that for myself to call a game really good, to put it in that upper echelon of short company, games that I truly deem to be phenomenal, it needs to nail the ending. Because sure, the journey matters, but the ending can make it all worth it and elevate everything that came before. And pretty much every game, now that I think about it. Every game in my top 10 nails the ending. But Xenoblade 2 and Nier Automata are just different. And if I had to point at any specific ending and say, that's my favorite, all I gotta do is listen to Weight of the World from Nier Automata's soundtrack, and I'm just immediately thrown back to all those times I played the game, all those times I've watched other people play the game, and I'm reminded why I have Nier in my top spot. It's truly a magical thing to experience back-to-back what would end up as your 2 favorite pieces of media of all time. And now all these years later, I can finally talk about why, because let me be frank for a bit. I knew one person that liked Xenoblade 2, and it was fun talking to him about it, but I knew no one who liked Nier Automata. So one of the great things about this channel is I get to talk about these games that I love so much and engage in discussion with people that love them just as much as I do. And sometimes I may disagree with someone, or someone may disagree with me, or just share a different opinion, but you know what, I think that's alright. People react to, experience, and process games differently. That two people can play these games and have completely different takeaways, and get something completely different out of them, or it might just be an outlet for them going through a rough patch, or might give them some perspective on how to deal with IRL anxieties or issues, or some combination, or really anything else. That's the power of media. The fact that people can go into these games with different perspectives and come out with different outlooks. And that's the beauty of the medium, and the interactive nature of video games, and letting me be an integral part of the game and its story and its gameplay is why it's my favorite form of media, and why I love games like Nier Automata so much. Because I hate the phrase, it's just a game. These are stories. And whether or not you yourself are someone who enjoys storytelling in games, you still form your own stories through the gameplay and the memories that are formed, the people you interact with while playing the games, the stories you consume, the perspectives or lessons you may get out of them. These two games came at a very big point in my life, and they helped give me perspective and show me that things may be a little bit deeper than they may seem. Stories matter, games matter, because how you react to and how you process a game is super individualized and personal, grounded in your own experiences and hardships and delights. Your favorite game of all time may be completely different than mine, and that's fine. Hell, that's the beauty of games, people. And one of the things that I really wanted to get across with this series, if we all shared the same opinion, it would be boring as sin. The fact we all get something different out of each and every game serves as rich soil from which interesting and nuanced discussion may bloom, and our appreciation for the medium as a whole, or these individual experiences, may prosper. So here's my story for how Xenoblade 2 and Nier Automata became my favorite games of all time. Because Xenoblade 2 only took the number 2 spot fairly recently. I always had it somewhere in the top 5, but I never really thought about where specifically. And now that I think about it, I've never been that good at ranking things in retrospect. Mainly because the last 5-6 years have been a source of drastic change in my gaming preferences. What I look for and what I want out of the game has changed drastically. But I think streaming Xenoblade 2 this last go-around, and making all these videos in the game, has solidified it as my number 2 favorite game of all time. It was always top 5, like I said, but every time I play that game again, I find something else that I love about it. I find something new. And sure, it has its problems, but I honestly don't mind them. Because the strengths, those highs, are so high and so consistently high that I don't mind that I'm not big on the gacha elements, or that it may take way too long for the combat to get flowing. Because the story, the world, the gameplay, the characters, the quests, the music, freaking everything resonates so much with me that I'm always willing to play the game again. Hell, I've played the game twice this year, and I'm honestly down to just pick it right back up and do another. Every time they do that panning shot of Gormott at the very beginning of Chapter 2, every time, it gets me just as much as it did the first. Hell, Uriah went from a zone that I was kind of okay about, to one of my favorite zones in all of gaming. The comedy gets me, the serious bits get me, I love the characters, the gameplay's super fun. It's one of those few games that just never gets old for me. And the ending, oh my god, the ending, it still gets me. One last year with the events of the ending happening, it's hard to match. It really is. And then you pivot over to Nier Automata, and you want to know what put this game in the discussion for greatest game of all time for me, and what keeps it in the number 1 spot for me? The ending. I have never seen anything so well written before. It still blows my mind, and it still blows me away how they incorporate the video game elements, and how they use them to further the story, the message, the culmination of all the game, all that it was trying to tell you, the music, the freaking credits, being an integral part of it. Nier Automata didn't just nail the ending, or nail the concept of an ending, it perfected it, I'd argue. It freaking perfected it. And I need to make a full spoiler video just on the ending at some point, because it's impossible to talk about this freaking thing without spoiling it. The twists and turns of Nier Automata's story, how it can get so dark. Darker than any other game I've ever played. And not through gore or violence, but through how heavy and emotional the narrative can get, how real it can be. but how it can, despite all of that, still end up being optimistic and hopeful, and for that to feel like a natural progression. It's honestly inspiring how they pull it off. And I feel like that's a common theme with Xenoblade 2 and Nier Automata, especially now that I say it out loud. Both stories get dark. I mean, they get really freaking dark, and they deal with heavy themes and motifs. But they both have you walking away feeling optimistic about what it means to be human, about the future. How when you can pull that mud-covered curtain back, you can see the faint glimmer of sunlight peering through the veil. There's a beauty to these games, and to the message they're trying to convey. There really is. The way they incorporate the music, integrate the storytelling through the gameplay, change perspective, use gamey elements, like the options menu for crying out loud, as part of the story. The dynamic and evolving relationship between the three characters 2B, 9S, and A2. When you think the game won't go there, or that it can't get more dark than this, it surprises you. Instead of being hyped and positive as I was in Xenoblade 2, what I thought while playing Nier Automata was, please don't let it get any worse than this. How can it get worse? And it always manages to twist the knife further and deeper than it did before. It tackles dark and complex themes and aspects of the human condition, and it doesn't shy away from it. It will show you this in broad daylight for all the world to see, while still keeping some subtlety for those who want to peel the layers back a bit. But it's unabashed with its criticisms of humanity and its display of them. How dark and macabre things can be, how reality can be, how life can be. It's a seemingly endless, hopeless cycle of pain and suffering and of death, but through all of that, you keep playing because you can't stop, and none of it feels over the top. It's all logical within the confines of this world. It may not make sense at first, but life doesn't either a lot of the time. It doesn't have to. It isn't obligated to make sense. Because bad crap happens, and it can blindside you, just like in the Automata, just like in Xenoblade 2. But it pushes you to keep on going, to take another step forward, motivates you to see what's next, and then you get to the ending, and it all comes together and just makes sense, and you walk away with an existential dread of the human condition, but optimistic that through your own force of will, through sheer raw determination, and the bonds you forged, there can be a better way. The story of the pods, the machines, each zone itself, seeing the carnival for the first time, discovering how important the side questing is, and how much is foreshadowed through them, the evolving world, how fun and interesting the gameplay is, and pretty much all of that applies to Xenoblade Chronicles 2. And that can go on, and on, and on, and on, and on, and you get the point. Whereas Nier Automata pushes your head down into the muck, and the mud, and the vitriol, and tells you a dark, but nuanced and important, meaningful, complex story, narrative about what does it mean to be alive. Is it even worth it? What Xenoblade 2 does is it intertwines comedy and those dark and macabre moments, blends them together, contrasts them, lulls you in with tropes and its very anime art style that's a departure from Xenoblade 1, lulls you in just to put that knife in your gut, just like Nier Automata. But you don't expect it with Xenoblade 2. It comes as a surprise, and you realize just how well-constructed both of these games are. Just how engaging and enjoyable they can be to play. How great they are at character development. How great they are at world building. How great they are at dialogue, at voice acting, at music, at musical implementation, at pacing. And how you can walk away still with hope. Still saying, yes, all of this is worth it. All this bad, all this difficulty, it's worth it because we can make a better future. And funnily enough, I think I just narrowed down or distilled what's my favorite theme in games, because that also applies for number 3 on my list, Final Fantasy XIV, and what that game tries to tell you. And I've played both of these games multiple times, and I rarely ever do that with a non-FPS game. I rarely ever replay an RPG to completion. I've replayed both of these games at least 3 or 4 times. And I've watched them another 2 to 4. So for all those reasons, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Nier Automata are my favorite games of all time. And I thought I could just make a regular video in the list for both of these games, and they will come. But if you follow my content, you know, the moment I revealed what 2 was, you knew what 1 was. We're going to ignore that video I made a few months back saying why Nier Automata was my favorite game of all time. We're going to just ignore that one. So I thought, let's just talk about why both of these games are in the number 1 and 2 spot. Because for me, it's not about why Nier Automata is 1 and why Xenoblade 2 is 2. It's why these games are here, and why I love these games so much. So I'm going to call the video there for today. Leave a comment down below with your favorite game of all time, or your favorite couple games of all time, and let me know why. I want to hear your stories. I'd love to hear your perspectives, what you got out of these games, the memories that you formed, if you're willing to talk about them. I'd love to hear that. I'd love to hear your perspective and your story, because that's the beauty of these games. We're all going to have a different answer to this question. And even if we share our favorite game of all time, the reason it's our favorite game of all time might differ. And I'd love to hear your reasoning, because your opinion matters. And while you're down there, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe out there, everybody. Have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody.